Holden didn't just close its doors, they spent decades building absolute disasters that basically forced Australians to buy a Ford instead. We're talking about the future of Holden that rotted in the driveway and the model so unreliable it nearly killed the brand 30 years early. Let's stop pretending every lion badge was a legend. Here are the 12 worst Holdens ever made, starting with a car that was doomed before it even left the factory. The button car plan of 1984 was a grand government scheme to rationalize the Australian car industry and make it globally competitive. What it actually produced was the Holden Apollo, a rebadged Toyota Camry wearing a lion badge with the conviction of a man in a Halloween costume trying to sneak into his ex's wedding. Launched in 1989 under a joint venture with Toyota Australia, both the Camry and its identical twin were built at the same plant, sold from rival showrooms, and Australian buyers immediately saw through the whole charade. Every single time, the real Camry dramatically outsold its Holden doppelganger. The Apollo wasn't a bad car. It was an identity crisis on wheels, a Holden that was absolutely not a Holden, sold to Holden loyalists who wanted an actual Holden. After 8 years of sales embarrassment, the joint venture collapsed, and the Apollo quietly died in 1997. On paper, the Piazza was genuinely exciting. Designed by one of the most famous designers in automotive history, this turbocharged rear-wheel drive coupe looked sensational and arrived in 1986 priced at a stunning $34,500. In practice, it was a spectacular commercial disaster. Period reviews savaged its terrifying handling, describing it as the most frightening car we have tested in a long time, with essentially reworked Holden Gemini running gear doing absolutely nothing useful at the limit. Holden managed to shift around 200 turbo units before the bottom fell completely out of the resale market, at which point they cut the price so aggressively they had to write existing owners a check for the difference. A rebate for traumatizing your customers is not a great sign. The Piazza vanished after barely a year and became the rarest badge engineering catastrophe in Holden's entire history. If you think a fake Camry in a lion costume and a terrified turbo coupe were bad, you have not seen anything yet, still to come. A fuel bill that could make a grown man cry, a sedan so invisible it practically erased itself from the showroom, and a number one so hated it earned a nickname Australians still spit out with pure disgust. The 1990s SUV boom was the easiest commercial gift any manufacturer could have received, and Holden managed to fumble it. The Frontera was a rebadged Opel built in the United Kingdom and sharing its bones with the Isuzu MU, a capable enough truck underneath, but wearing that Holden Lion badge in a way that fooled nobody. It had a 3.2-liter V6 in its larger variant, reasonable off-road credibility, and a reputation for drinking fuel with spectacular enthusiasm. On-road dynamics were firmly in the agricultural implement category. Critics politely called it an orphan in a crowded segment, which is the motoring press's diplomatic way of saying it had no real identity, no passionate following, and no compelling reason to exist when buyers could access genuine purpose-built 4x4s. Holden soldiered on with it for nearly a decade before quietly replacing it with something even worse, which we will absolutely get to. The Malibu arrived in 2013 to fill the gaping hole left by the unloved Epica, which had just been dragged out the back and quietly put down. The replacement was a rebadged Chevrolet, originally designed for the American market, built in Korea, and given a restyled nose so it could pretend to be a Holden. Motoring journalists generously described its exterior styling as warming you like an old cardigan, which is not a compliment, and its performance as thoroughly inoffensive in every direction. By 2013, Australians were abandoning the medium sedan segment with real urgency, and the Malibu gave them absolutely no reason to stay. It wasn't awful, it was worse than awful. It was invisible. Holden pulled the Malibu from sale in late 2016 after just 3 years, with most Australians never having formed a single strong opinion about its existence in either direction, an achievement of sorts. When Ford launched the Territory in 2004, Australian-engineered, purpose-built, brilliant, Holden's answer was essentially a Commodore wagon with a lift kit. The Adventra arrived in 2003 as a full-time all-wheel drive family hauler, looking like it had raided an HSV parts bin, wearing a bush hat it borrowed from someone else. It was not a bad vehicle, it was just spectacularly wrong for its moment in history. The V8 version inhaled 15.3 litres per 100 kilometres by official claim. And this from a wagon aimed squarely at suburban families right as petrol prices began their merciless climb. The Territory destroyed it in the marketplace because the Territory was everything the Adventra wasn't: focused, efficient, and purpose-designed. Holden killed the V8 Adventra in late 2005, struggling to justify manufacturing complexity for something nobody was buying. It lasted 3 painful years. Think it can't get worse than a thirsty all-wheel drive wagon nobody asked for. Think again. We are heading straight into Holden's darkest imported era, where cheap rebadges, broken reputations, and one catastrophically unsafe small car turned loyal Holden buyers into unpaid crash test dummies. If you want proof that Holden's imported sedan strategy was in genuine crisis, look no further than the Epica. Underneath its unremarkable exterior sat a rebadged Daewoo Tosca, a Korean-built medium sedan that arrived in March 2007 and was so unloved that Holden quietly slipped it off the price list in February 2011 without fanfare, ceremony, or the slightest sense that anyone had noticed. Owners reported transmission failures, erratic electronics, steering faults, and a diesel variant so plagued by fuel feed hose defects it was subject to a fire hazard recall. One owner's transmission failed completely 400 kilometers from home. Holden's response was to suggest they find a used replacement part, except no good ones were available because the car was already discontinued. The Epica's own factory colleagues in Korea reportedly gave the Daewoo Tosca name such a bad reputation internally that they built a completely new car and refused to associate the name with it. Australians, who remembered the sharp, European-engineered Holden Astra, a genuinely rewarding small car, were not prepared for what came next. The Viva arrived in 2005 as a rebadged Daewoo Lazzetti, wearing the Holden lion like a lanyard at a conference nobody wanted to attend. Critics catalogued its wobbly dynamics, cheap interior plastics, and styling that managed to achieve the aesthetic ambition of a rental car booked under a fake name. There was nothing dramatically wrong with the Viva. It drove, it turned, it had the legally required number of wheels. But compared to the European Holdens it replaced in Australians' memories, it was a devastating downgrade presented at full price. Holden loyalists expecting quality and character received Korean value dressed up in Australian branding, and the resentment was immediate and enduring. The Viva shuffled out of showrooms in 2009, unmourned, unloved, and swiftly forgotten by everyone, including, seemingly, Holden itself. We are officially entering the danger zone. The top 5 includes a Barina that humiliated the badge, a Commodore decision so cynical it enraged an entire country, and 2 cars so infamous their names basically became warnings passed down from mechanic to mechanic. The Barina name had genuine heritage. Early Barinas were Suzuki Swifts, genuinely fun, reliable little machines Australians adored. Then, Opel-sourced Barinas arrived, still European and sorted. Then in 2005, the TK arrived, a rebadged Daewoo Kalos that had previously been sold in Australia under the actual Daewoo name, which was not exactly a recommendation. NCAP crash-tested a 5-door TK and awarded it a humiliating 2-star adult occupant protection rating, in an era when competitors were routinely hitting 4 and 5 stars. The thermostat housings cracked, the camshaft position sensors failed, the idle was erratic, and the ABS module was subject to a formal recall for potentially compromising braking performance. Owners spent thousands on repairs for a car worth almost nothing. A revised TK2 eventually clawed its way to 4 stars, but the damage to the Barina name was real, lasting, and well-deserved. For 40 years, Commodore meant something. It meant rear-wheel drive, big engines, and a car designed and engineered right here in Australia. Then, with local manufacturing done and the Elizabeth plant closed, Holden made the decision that enraged an entire nation. They slapped the Commodore badge on a rebadged Opel insignia built in Germany with front-wheel drive, 4-cylinder engines, and not a single atom of Commodore DNA anywhere on it. The ZB wasn't a catastrophic car in isolation. As a European medium sedan, it was actually reasonably competent, but calling it a Commodore was arguably the most cynical badge engineering decision in Australian automotive history. Buyers responded with devastating indifference. Holden pulled the Commodore and the entire brand from the market in 2020. The ZB Commodore wasn't just a bad Holden. It wasn't just the last Commodore. It became the symbol of Holden's entire final chapter, and Australians made very sure it knew exactly how they felt about that. We are down to the final 3, and this is where Holden's horror story goes from embarrassing to legendary. One car destroyed its own name forever. One became a modern mechanic's nightmare, and the number 1 is the undisputed king of Holden disasters. A car so bad Australians renamed it before Holden even finished selling it. In 1982, Holden launched the Camira with enormous fanfare as their bold European-flavored future. Front-wheel drive, modern engineering, a crisp new direction for the brand. The reality that followed was a masterclass in how to turn a promising idea into a catastrophic reputation. Early ZB Camiras suffered smoking engines, paint peeling with startling enthusiasm, doors that filled with water because the drainage holes were insufficient, and an overheating problem so consistent in air-conditioned models that the car was pulled entirely from the New Zealand market. The Camira required a completely different driving style to any previous Australian car. It demanded revs rather than torque, and owners who didn't know that found out the expensive way. By the time Holden had actually sorted the Camira into a genuinely decent car in later years, the damage was done. The name itself had become automotive shorthand for unreliability, and no amount of improvement could rescue it. There are problem-plagued cars, and then there is the Holden Cruze, a vehicle that managed to achieve legendary status in the worst possible category. The list of documented failures is genuinely staggering. Oil cooler failures that pumped engine oil directly into the cooling system, producing the now infamous chocolate milk effect in the coolant header tank. PCV valve failures causing rough idle and engine damage. Automatic transmission failures so frequent that fitting a second-hand replacement unit was essentially guaranteed to give you the same problem again. Camshaft cover failures, ignition coil failures, coolant leaks, ABS sensor failures, and a braking recall affecting manual transmission models. Mechanics who worked on them freely admitted it in writing. One independent reviewer, with the precision of someone who had seen far too many of these, concluded that everything attached to the engine, and everything inside it, was problematic. Australians who bought Cruzes looking for an affordable, reliable compact got neither. Here it is, the undisputed, undefeated champion of Holden horror. A car so comprehensively awful it has earned its own affectionate nickname among the Australian motoring public, the Captiva. The Captiva arrived in 2006 as a rebadged Daewoo pitched as Holden's territory-fighting family SUV. What followed was 12 years of timing chain failures, oil leaks, head gasket collapses, DPF failures in diesel variants, catastrophic electrical systems that could cause the engine to stop completely at speed, and transmission failures that arrived reliably and expensively. Owners who trusted the Holden badge paid for that trust repeatedly. The Captiva's product review page reads like a support group transcript, averaging just 2.9 stars from over 500 owners, and the one-star reviews read like crime scene reports. 12 years. One catastrophic reputation. The Captiva is the last word in Holden's worst chapter, and it earned every syllable of that nickname. Holden gave Australia some of the greatest cars ever built anywhere in the world, but it also gave us the Apollo, the Captiva, and everything in between. Did you have any bad experience with some of these cars? Don't take any of this too seriously. I hope I made some of you laugh. If you enjoyed watching this episode, give it a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.